I'm Pastor John Baird, and I want to welcome you to the Way the Word Ministries television ministry. I'm honored to be here, as always, sharing God's Word with each and every one of you, and we are still in our study of the book of John. This is message number 63 in our study, and today we're going to be in John chapter 16, verses 16 through 33. There were these two hunters named Jerry and Jason, and they were out hunting in the woods, and these two guys, they got lost. And Jerry said to Jason, I've always heard that if you're out in the woods and you get lost, you're supposed to shoot 3 times in the air, and if anyone's around, they'll come and help you. So Jerry, he shot 3 times in the air, and they waited a while, and nothing happened. So Jason, he decided he'd do it. So he shot 3 times in the air. They waited around, and nothing happened. And so they talked about it for a while. And finally, Jerry said, well, I'm going to try it again. And he said, I sure hope it works this time, because we down to our last 3 arrows. Someone say clueless. Well, on this night before the cross, the 11 disciples that are still with Jesus, they were confused. They were in the dark, both figuratively and literally. First of all, it was nighttime. Not only that, it was the middle of the night. Again, the night before the cross. And Jesus, he knew he was going to be crucified in just a few hours. But again, the disciples, they are clueless. They are confused and afraid. And remember, these 11 disciples had been with Jesus for over 3 years. Yeah, they had witnessed some of the absolutely amazing miracles of Jesus. They saw Jesus feed 5,000 people with just 5 little loaves of bread and 2 tiny fish. They saw Jesus actually walking on top of the water. They saw a man who'd been dead for 4 days come stumbling out of a tomb, still wrapped up in his grave clothes. But even after seeing all those miracles, they were still full of doubt and fear because of some of the things Jesus has been telling them about himself. But this time of weak faith on their part, it doesn't cause Jesus to get mad at them. Jesus, he doesn't rebuke them for being filled with sorrow and despair. Instead, he gives them and us, because our faith can get weak at times too, he gives all of us a promise. And the promise he gives us is that our sorrow will be turned into joy. Remember, time has no hold on Jesus or the words of Jesus. Look at Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8. It says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. And we need to hear these words from Jesus in our verses today, here in our season, just as much as those disciples did back there in the first century. And remember again, Jesus' words, they aren't limited by time. And in our verses today, Jesus is going to give us 4 ways that we can move from sorrow to joy. And as I sometimes do, I'm not going to read all the verses at once. Instead, I'm going to split them up through the message and use them to introduce each point. And so let's dive in now. Here we go. The book of John, chapter 16, verses 16 through 22. Jesus said, in a little while, you will see me no more. And then after a little while, you will see me. At this, some of his disciples said to one another, what does he mean by saying, in a little while, you will see me no more, and then after a little while, you will see me? And because I am going to the Father, they kept asking, what does he mean by a little while? We don't understand what he is saying. Jesus saw that they wanted to ask him about this, so he said to them, are you asking one another what I mean when I said, in a little while you will see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me? Very truly I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. So it is with you. Now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy. And so the first thing we see in our verses here is that we can move from sorrow to joy when we, number one, anticipate the joy of reunion. Now, I want to look back at some of Jesus' words from earlier in our study of John's gospel account. Back in John chapter 8, verse 21, you might remember Jesus was having a dispute with the Pharisees and some of their followers, and Jesus said, I am going away, and you will look for me, and you will die in your sin. Where I go, you cannot come. And then back in the book of John chapter 13, verse 33, when Jesus and his disciples were having their Passover celebration, also known as the Last Supper, Jesus told the disciples, my children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now, where I am going, you cannot come. In those two verses, as well as in our verses today, Jesus, he's talking about his physical death on the cross. But the disciples, they didn't understand that, and so they are filled with worry and doubt. And so what Jesus is trying to tell them here is, hey, instead of focusing on the coming separation from me, be looking forward to reunion with me. In verse 16 of our verses, Jesus told these guys, in a little while you will see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me. And then Jesus tries to encourage them in verse 20 of our verses when he says, so you have sorrow now, but I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy from you. So what does Jesus mean by all that? Well, for those first disciples, there would be an immediate application followed by an ultimate application. Letter A, the immediate application meant that they would weep at Jesus' death, but rejoice at his resurrection. Within hours, or as Jesus said in our verses, in a little while, Jesus would be arrested, he'd be put on trial, a kangaroo court, he'd be found guilty, and then the Romans, they would hold him until they crucified him. After Jesus died physically, his body would be placed in a borrowed tomb, and for that little while, as Jesus said in our verses, the disciples, they wouldn't see him, and they would be filled with sorrow. But again, in verse 16 of our verses, Jesus told them, a little while later, you will see me. And that's exactly what happened when the disciples saw the resurrected Jesus. When they saw that Jesus was alive, their sorrow was turned into joy. And that's letter A, the immediate application. They would weep, the disciples would weep at Jesus' death, but they would rejoice at Jesus' resurrection. And letter B, the ultimate application, tells us that all of Jesus' followers will one day leave this world of tears to enter into the joy of his presence forever. Jesus has ascended back into heaven, but one day there is going to be a joyful reunion. There's going to be a reckoning, a reconciliation. All of us who follow Jesus, we're going to see Jesus either when he comes to get us in the rapture or when we die. But either way, all the sorrow and the tears of this life right here, they're going to be transformed into joy for us at seeing Jesus face to face. And Jesus, he compares this joy to childbirth. I've got two sons, and I can absolutely remember when both of them were born. My oldest son, Zach, was born when I was in the Navy at the hospital on the base where my ship was ported. And back in those days, those Navy doctors, they wouldn't let the expectant dads go in and witness the birth. And I really wanted to be there because I was worried about how things were going. But within minutes of him being born, they brought him out and they handed him to me, and all of my panic and anxiety and worry, it was turned immediately into the joy of seeing my first child. It was the greatest, most exciting moment of my life. Now, when my second son, Eli, was born, I wasn't in the Navy anymore, and so they let me go in to witness his birth. Now, both my sons were born through C-section, but like I said, I didn't get to watch the first one be born. So when I came in to watch son number 2 be born, they had an orderly stand behind me in case I fainted. But my attention button, man, it was on hold and it was on high because I was once again really worried. But when little Eli's head popped out of there and I saw him, once again, all my worry, my panic, and my anxiety was turned to joy. The joy of seeing my second son be born. And it was the second most greatest exciting moment in my entire life. And it was every bit as wonderful as the first. Well, Jesus, he said that that's what the reunion in heaven is going to be like. It's going to be a time of joyful reunion for all of us who've placed our faith in Jesus. And I know that all of us, we all have a lot of friends and loved ones whose souls and spirits are already there in heaven with Jesus. And so again, the day of the bodily resurrection, well, it's going to be a day of joyful reunion for all of us who've placed our faith in Jesus. I'm really looking forward to seeing all my friends and loved ones who left this earth and made it to heaven. But as much as I'm looking forward to seeing them, regardless of whoever else is in heaven, our greatest and most joyful reunion will be with Jesus himself. With the downturn of societies and cultures throughout our world today, it's not hard to see that the real answers, the answers that we seek and need, well, they can only come from God. And so with that in mind, the only wise thing for all of us to do is to move our perspective from earth to heaven. We need to focus on and number one, anticipate the joy of reunion with the true lover of our souls. Let's jump back into our verses now and look at verses 23 and 24 of John 16. Jesus said, "In that day you will no longer ask me anything. Very truly I tell you, my Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. Until now you have not asked for anything in my name. Ask and you will receive, and your joy will be complete." And so we can move from sorrow to joy because we can ask God the Father anything in Jesus' name. There are many precious promises of answered prayer in the Bible, but unfortunately, a lot of those precious promises, they've been abused and corrupted by what's known as the prosperity gospel. Some greedy ministries out there, they've twisted the words of Jesus, the very words of Jesus here in our verses today, where Jesus says, "Ask anything in my name." These greedy ministries, what they do is they tell people, hey, you can have a good health and you can have all the wealth if you just have enough faith. And that false teaching, the prosperity gospel, it's ruined not only a lot of churches right here in the United States of America, but around the world. It has stifled the walks of many believers because they spend the majority of their time trying to live up to something that they can't possibly live up to. And the saddest thing of all, it's taken people who were on their way to finding Jesus and it's caused them to walk away from Jesus. Listen, if what we ask for or say in prayer is not for God's glory and according to God's will, saying in Jesus' name is meaningless. Genuinely praying in Jesus' name and for Jesus' glory is what's important. It's not attaching certain words to the end of a prayer because it's not the words in the prayer that matter, but the purpose behind the prayer. That's why in Matthew chapter 6, verses 7 and 8, Jesus said, "When you pray, do not say the same thing over and over again, making long prayers like the people who do not know God. They think they are heard because their prayers are long. Do not be like them. Your Father knows what you need before you ask Him." Asking or praying in Jesus' name, it's not some magic formula that causes God to open the vaults of secular humanist health and wealth. No, the essence of praying in Jesus' name, it means that we're praying for things that are in agreement with God's will. It means that all of us as Jesus' followers, we're willing to align our will with God's will. And once we do that, that means we're going to pray in God's will. Look what the Apostle John said in 1 John chapter 5, verses 14 and 15. He said, "This is the confidence we have in approaching God, that if we ask anything according to His will, He hears us. And if we know that He hears us, whatever we ask, we know that we have have what we asked of him. Praying in Jesus' name, it means praying for things that are going to honor and glorify Jesus. And so when we go to our Heavenly Father in prayer, we can, number 2, ask the Father anything in Jesus' name. And because of who Jesus is and what Jesus did on the cross, God answers. God doesn't answer because of who we are or what we've done, but God, He's going to move heaven and earth to glorify and honor His only begotten Son. Let's continue now in verses 25 through 30 of John chapter 16. Jesus said, "Though I have been speaking figuratively, a time is coming when I will no longer use this kind of language, but will tell you plainly about my Father. In that day you will ask in my name. I am not saying that I will ask the Father on your behalf. No, the Father Himself loves you because you have loved me and have believed that I came from God. I came from the Father and entered the world. Now I am leaving the world and going back to the Father." Then Jesus' disciples said, "Now you are speaking clearly and without figures of speech. Now we can see that you know all things and that you do not even need to have anyone ask you questions. This makes us believe that you came from God." So we can move from sorrow to joy as we, number 3, admit that we will never know all the answers. I love the exchange that just took place in those verses we just read, and you just have to smile when you look at verse 25 where Jesus basically says, "I've been using figures of speech, but the time is coming when I will speak to you plainly about my Father." And then the disciples respond and they basically say, "Okay, now we understand everything. We don't need to ask you anything else, Jesus." Man, were they ever jumping the gate, because even though they said that, they still didn't get it. In just a few hours, those guys, those disciples, they're going to leave Jesus like rats leaving a sinking ship. Have you ever had someone try to explain something to you and finally you just say, "Oh yeah, okay, I get it," even though you didn't get it? Well, the disciples, they obviously didn't understand everything, because over the next few days, all we're going to see is their worry and their doubt, even though Jesus had told them several times when He was with them that He was going to be crucified. Look what Jesus said to them in the book of Matthew, chapter 20, verses 17 through 19. Jesus said, "We are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn Him to death and will hand Him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified. On the third day He will be raised to life." But the disciples, they were still clueless. If they really had understood what Jesus had said, well, they wouldn't have been hiding in fear behind locked doors on that first resurrection day. No, they would have been gathered around that tomb on that Sunday morning, waiting to welcome the resurrected Lord Jesus. And I want you to understand, I'm not throwing stones at those first disciples here. They seriously did not understand, and Jesus knew that they didn't understand, and again, He did not rebuke them for it. Jesus understood that the disciples wouldn't fully understand the truth of what was taking place until the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit would fill them and guide them into all truth. And Jesus, He doesn't rebuke any of us when our understanding is blurred either. Now, to show you just what I'm talking about here, Jesus, He spent more than 40 days after the resurrection with those first disciples, and right when He was getting ready to ascend back into heaven, the disciples asked Him a question, and you'll find that question in the book of Acts chapter 1 verse 6. They said, "Lord, are you restoring the kingdom to Israel at this time?" So obviously the disciples, they still didn't get it. Now, that happened 10 days before Pentecost, and the personal application here for all of us is that, well, we're a whole lot like those first century disciples. We can go to our respective churches and study the Bible for decades. We can take classes, we can attend seminars, but as Jesus' followers, there will always be more for us to learn as long as we're on this side of heaven. So none of us can ever make the claim that those first century disciples mistakenly made that night either. "Hey, Jesus, well, we got it all figured out now." As believers in Jesus, we're always going to be followers of Jesus and thereby students of Jesus and students of Jesus' Word. And we need to, number 3, admit that we will never know all the answers, at least not on this side of heaven. But that doesn't mean we should stop seeking. We should constantly be seeking God's truth. And on that note, we're going to look at our final 3 verses where Jesus is going to respond now to his disciples' claim that they understand everything that he's saying. Now, let's jump back in John 16, verses 31 through 33. Do you now believe? Jesus replied, a time is coming, and in fact has come, when you will be scattered, each to your own home. You will leave me all alone. Yet I am not alone, for my Father is with me. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. So we can move from sorrow to joy when we, number 4, accept the peace Jesus offers in times of suffering. I'm bringing you this message in the late summer of 2024, and right now people out there, not just in our own nation, but all across this whole round world, they need to hear this powerful promise of peace from Jesus. We're living in stressful times. People everywhere are full of anxiety. Our own nation is experiencing an economic meltdown that began in early 2021. We're seeing graphic examples of socialism being instituted into our own government through corrupt career politicians and their greed. They put their greed ahead of the people's needs. We're seeing hatred and violence everywhere as those in power try to change the narrative of this free nation into one where a very small group of people make the decisions for everybody else, even to the point of mutilating our children to alter their gender. We are on our way to becoming a modern-day Sodom and Gomorrah. The stress meter in the USA is off the chart. We're suffering from crisis fatigue. We are living in a geopolitical, media-saturated context where a globalist agenda is really the only common denominator. And the whole thing is compounded by this social amplification out there that tries to create crisis after crisis after crisis until our very well-being has eroded. And they do all of this in an attempt to come along afterwards so that they can look like some kind of heroes or some kind of humanist saviors to their deceived followers. And this is what the Bible refers to as the spirit of Antichrist. Look at 1 John chapter 4, verses 2 and 3. This is how you can recognize the Spirit of God. Every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God, but every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of Antichrist, which you have heard is coming, and even now is already in the world. But brothers and sisters, we don't get our worldview from corrupt career politicians or Hollywood elitists or those sports elitists out there. No, we are blood-bought children of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And our worldview is founded on Jesus. It's shaped by who Jesus is and what Jesus did. Again, verse 33 of our verses, Jesus said, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Jesus didn't sugarcoat it. There's suffering all around us out there, but I want you to notice that inside of this great promise, Jesus, he gives us a command. He says, take heart. In other words, be courageous. And that, brothers and sisters, is the last command Jesus issued to all of his followers before he went to the cross. Take heart. Again, be courageous. Listen, peace isn't the absence of suffering. Peace is being in the midst of the suffering and still finding calm in who you are in God. So where do we find God's power to be courageous? We find it in the suffering, and the reason we can find it there is because as followers of Jesus, we are in Jesus and Jesus is in us. So what about it? What is your source of security today? Is it your job? Is it your money? Is it your family? Is it your health? Is it your political affiliation? Listen, all those things can fail you, but Jesus, He will never fail you. If your security is in Jesus, then Jesus is in you, and He will give you the strength to take heart and to be courageous. Life begins once Jesus becomes the reason you live it. And because you're in Jesus, well, He's going to move you from sorrow to joy. Now, one of my favorite Christian songs, I guess you'd call it a gospel song. No, I guess you'd call it a hymn, whatever you want to call it. One of my favorite Christian songs, one of my favorite worship songs is "It Is Well With My Soul." And this song, "It Is Well With My Soul," it's a great example of taking heart and being courageous during a great time of suffering. It was written by a man named Horatio G. Spafford, and he was a lawyer and a real estate investor in Chicago. Now, he lost most of his fortune in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, and the following year, in 1872, he lost his 4-year-old son, the only son he had, to scarlet fever. Well, in 1873, he decided he and the rest of his family needed a vacation. He was starting to make some money again. So he, his wife, and his 4 daughters, they planned a vacation to Europe. But at the last minute, due to some last minute business kind of deals, he had to stay behind. So his wife and daughters, they got on the ship and they headed for Europe. And he told them he would take the next ship in about 5 days and meet them over there. Unfortunately, his wife Anna and their 4 daughters, the ship they were on, it collided with another ship on a foggy, cold night out there in the Atlantic Ocean. Both ships sunk. All 4 of Horatio Spafford's daughters drowned, and when the rescue team got there, they found his wife Anna clutching to some debris floating out in the ocean. They took her to Scotland. That was the nearest port for medical care, and as soon as she could, she sent her husband Horatio a telegram. And the first sentence on the telegram said, "Saved and alone, what shall I do?" Immediately, Horatio Spafford, he boarded a ship to go be with his wife. And on the voyage there, the captain of that ship, he called Horatio Spafford up to the bridge, and he showed him the general vicinity where his daughters had been lost. Now, Horatio Spafford, he was a man of deep faith. He asked the captain if he would anchor the ship there for a short time, which the captain did. Horatio Spafford, he went out on the deck all by himself, and in the very place where his daughters had drowned, his 4 daughters had drowned, he sat down, prayed, and he wrote these words: "When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. Though Satan should buffet and trials should come, let this blessed assurance control, that Christ has regarded my helpless estate, and hath shed his own blood for my soul. It is well with my soul." Man, talk about taking heart. Talk about being courageous. I'm pretty sure that Horatio Spafford was focused on verse 33 from our study here today. These are the last words, again, that Jesus said to his disciples, not just those first century disciples, but us, the disciples here in our day, in our season, before he went to the cross. We should remember these words, and they should be a part of our daily routine. In John 16:33, Jesus said, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world." There is suffering all around us today, brothers and sisters, out there in that lost and fallen world. People are hurting everywhere. We need to go out and we need to tell them, hey, take heart. We need to let them know that in Jesus and only in Jesus, they can move from sorrow to joy. Let's make that our goal. Let that be the motive of our hearts. Let that be the mindset that we go forward with every day. Listen, Jesus, he died for us. Let's go out and live for him, and let's do what he told us to do. He said, if you love me, you'll obey my commands. And his command, the very last command he told us, was to go out into that lost and fallen world and spread the gospel, spread the good news about him. I've done it here today. I'm going to continue to do it no matter where I go, no matter where I am, and I know you are too. Until the next time you and I meet meet here on the Way the Word Television's television ministry. May God bless you, may God keep you, and may God grant each and every one of you the desires of your hearts, all in Jesus' mighty name. Until then, I'll see you later, everybody.